Good afternoon from Tokyo, Japan International Cooperation Agency, JICA Ogata Sadako Research Institute for Peace and Development. Thank you very much for joining our knowledge forum titled Reconceptualizing Human Mobility from a Human Security Perspective. What is safe and secure corridors for all? What is Japan's role? I am Akutsu Kentaro, the Executive Senior Research Fellow of the JICA Ogata Research Institute. I will be your chair today. Now, let me introduce our 6 distinguished speakers and panelists today. First, Ms. Valerie Svobodowa, Chief of Asylum and Migration Section, Division of International Protection, Policy and Law Service, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR. So, Valerie, thank you very much. Next, Ms. Laura Nistori, Displacement Tracking Matrix Global Coordinator, International Organizations for Migration, IOM. So, thank you very much, Laura. Next, Dr. Gracia Liu-Fara, Professor, Graduate School of Asia Pacific Studies, Waseda University. Thank you, Dr. Gracia. Next, Ms. Sasaki Shoko, Executive Director of Japan Immigration Association, and also the former Commissioner of the Immigration Services Japan. Commissioner of the Immigration Services Agency of Japan. Oh, thank you, Madam Sasaki. And next, Dr. Saito Kiyoko, Senior Research Fellow, JICA Ogata Research Institute. Thank you very much, Dr. Saito. And then Dr. Orita Tomomi, Principal Research Fellow, also the JICA Ogata Research Institute. Thank you, Dr. Orita. And I am very afraid to announce that due to urgent circumstances, Dr. Hein de Haas, University of Amsterdam, cannot participate in this seminar today. I am deeply sorry for this sudden change. Okay, then first, let me invite Ms. Kamei Haruko, Director General of JICA Ogata Research Institute, to give the opening remarks of this event. So, Madam Kamei, please.
Thank you very much, Akutsu-san. Distinguished guests, esteemed panelists, and all participants, good afternoon from Tokyo. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to the JICA Research Institute's Knowledge Forum on Reconceptualizing Human Mobility from a Human Security Perspective. What is safe and secure corridors for all? What is Japan's role? I sincerely thank you for your presence and participation. This forum aims to explore how we can ensure safe and secure corridors for refugees, migrants, and all those engaged in human mobility. In recent years, the world has witnessed human mobility on an unprecedented scale. Japan is also undergoing significant demographic changes with a growing number of foreign residents living in our society. Currently, over 80% of foreign workers in Japan came from Asia. However, with deepening shortfall of domestic labor force to sustain the economy, our prediction suggests that Japan will need more foreign workers from a more diverse range of countries worldwide. According to the United Nations, it is estimated that the global working age population will grow by approximately 1.5 billion people between 2010 and 2050, and 2/3 of them will be from African countries. This highlights the growing importance of understanding human mobility from broader economic and social development perspectives. Until now, the issue of cross-border human mobility has often been discussed in terms of the supply and demand of human resources. These debates are based on the migration policies standpoint, and many migrant-receiving countries have introduced selective migration policy that prioritize individuals with specific skills. Consequently, migrants are often viewed primarily in economic terms, and countries that send migrants have focused on increasing their values by enhancing their skills. However, human mobility must not be seen as merely a labor transaction. Rather, it should be captured from a human security perspective as a means to realize a society that enables everyone to live in dignity. JICA is the development cooperation agency that has adopted human security as its mission. The late Dr. Sadako Ogata introduced this concept to JICA when she assumed the presidency in 2003. Today, human security is firmly embedded in JICA's practices, and the JICA Ogata Research Institute continues to promote it through intellectual engagement and contributions. Our research on safe and secure international migration will all align with the mission. We are honored today to welcome a distinguished panel of experts. First of all, Ms. Lola Nisturi from the International Organization for Migration, IOM, and Ms. Valerie Svobodova from UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, Professor Garcia Liu-Fowler from Waseda University, and Ms. Shoko Sasaki, Executive Director of the Japan Immigration Association. I am confident that today's forum will serve as a valuable platform to deepen our shared understanding of human mobility and to identify practical approaches to advancing it from a human security perspective. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Kamei. So then the next agenda is introduction and also the outline of this seminar. Let me invite Dr. Saito, JICA Ogata Research Institute, to make such outline. So please, Dr. Saito.
Yes, everyone, I'm truly delighted that we have gathered here today, bringing together all the stakeholders involved in human mobility. In our modern society, which faces complex risks, the volume of international human mobility is increasing year by year. In 2024, the global stock of migrants reached 304 million, meaning that approximately 3.7% of the world's population are migrants. Japan is no exception to this trend. As of June 2025, the number of foreign residents in Japan reached 3,223,858, a 4.8% increase from the previous year. Moreover, on June 21, 2024, the Act of Partially Amending the Human Mobility Control and Refugee Recognition Act and the Act on Proper Implementation of Technical Intern Training and Protection of Technical Intern Trainee was promulgated. This system fundamentally revises the Technical Intern Training Program, which aimed at international contribution through skill transfer into a system that aims to develop and secure human resources in fields facing labor shortages in Japan. This marks a new phase for Japan. With this legal reform, Japanese stakeholders are advancing their efforts in business and human rights, which align with JICA's commitment to protecting people's lives, livelihoods, and dignity. JICA Ogata Research Institute has also been conducting projects on international human mobility, and today we will share some of the findings. However, as we progressed with our research, a certain concern grew stronger. In recent discussion on international human mobility, it is undisputed that human mobility policies should be people-centered. However, upon closer examination, are the discussions in Japan really about people, or have they become more about workers? International human mobility is not just about the movement of workers. We must not forget that many stakeholders are involved with the people who move. In other words, when we think about international human mobility, we need to consider the safety and security of all people, not just the workers. Furthermore, we need to think about the safety and security of all people throughout the entire journey, not just at the points of departure and arrival. Based on this concern, we have brought together stakeholders with deep experience in refugees, migrants, and the people who welcome them. Although their mandates and position may differ, they all aim to develop safe and secure human mobility corridors. We hope that by having them share their perspective on the future human mobility system and discussing what Japan is expected to contribute to its development, we can collectively think about Japan's future. Looking at the governance of international human mobility from the 1951 Refugee Convention to the present framework, it seems to have evolved from refugee protection to more comprehensive approach. The 1951 Convention proposed the right of refugees, established the principle of non-refoulement, and prohibited the return of refugees to areas where they would face persecution. In 1967, protocol relating to the status of refugees removed the geographical and temporal limitations of the original convention. This expansion broadened the scope of refugee protection from its initial focus on post-war European refugees to a global scale. In 1990, International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of Their Families was a significant turning point. For the first time, a comprehensive framework for protecting the rights of migrant workers and their families was established, and concerns about labor exploitation were addressed. This convention recognized that human mobility is not just about the movement of individuals, but also affects families and entire communities. In 2000, the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime introduced an important security dimension to human mobility management. By addressing human trafficking and criminalizing smuggling networks, this framework acknowledged the dark side of international human mobility and the need to protect vulnerable migrants from exploitation. The framework for international human mobility has become more comprehensive, and the 2016 New York Declaration established the first comprehensive framework for responding to refugees and migrants, setting out significant political commitments by the international community. This declaration recognized that addressing refugee and migrant situations requires whole-of-society approach. Finally, the 2018 Global Compact, the Global Compact on Refugees, and the Global Compact of Safe, Orderly, and Regular Human Mobility emphasize international cooperation in protecting and supporting refugees and migrants, and aim to promote a coordinated human mobility approach that benefits both migrants and host communities. Now, let us revisit the comprehensive approach and consider what it means for all. The New York Declaration strengthens the international community's solidarity with refugees and migrants and aims to further develop the response to large movements of refugees and migrants. First, it states, we affirm and will fully protect the human rights of all refugees and migrants, regardless of status. All are rights holders. Furthermore, it declares, though their treatment is governed by separate legal frameworks, refugees and migrants have the same universal human rights and fundamental freedoms. They also face many common challenges and have similar vulnerabilities, including in the context of large movements. This clearly states that all people, including refugees and migrants, regardless of their status, are rights holders. In other words, everyone should be guaranteed universal human rights and fundamental freedoms, and they face common challenges and vulnerabilities in ensuring these rights. Although refugees and migrants have their respective legal frameworks, there is a common goal that transcends these frameworks. This is truly a people-centered approach that including all people. In 1994, the United Nations Development Program proposed the concept of human security in its Human Development Report. This idea ensures the right of all people to live in dignity, free from fear and want. Today, the threats surrounding us have changed significantly. In the past, the focus was on the issue of refugees and displaced persons due to the regional conflicts. However, we are now facing new globalized threats that the complex interplay of physical, biological, and social aspects. Responsible sovereign states alone can no longer adequately address these complex threats. Cooperation among various stakeholders has become indispensable. Particularly important is a preventive approach rather than reacting after a problem occurs. In today's world, where people's situation can deteriorate suddenly, this preventive perspective is crucial. To realize safe and secure human mobility corridors that protect lives, livelihoods, and dignity, we need to act based on 4 principles. First, people-centered, prioritizing people's needs. Second, comprehensive, an approach that considers all aspects. Third, context-specific, flexible responses tailored to each situation. Fourth, preventive, measure taken before problem arise. To put 3 principles into practice, 3 strategies are important. First, protection, safeguarding people from danger. Next, empowerment, nurturing people's ability to solve problems on their own. And finally, solidarity, cooperation among society as a whole and the international community. Human security is not a distant ideal. It is a practical issue that we can and must implement, and that Japan must put into practice. Through the cooperation of society as a whole and the international community, we want to think together with all of you today about what a safe and secure human mobility corridor look like, where all people are free from fear and want and can live in dignity. Today, we are facing a turning point in how we perceive the phenomenon of human mobility itself. Professor Ha's aspiration capability model introduced today captures human mobility from a completely new, people-centered perspective. Until now, human mobility has been considered to be determined by external factors. However, Professor Haas argues that human mobility is defined by individual aspiration and capabilities. Human mobility is not just a means to an end, but an action that brings hope in itself. Both moving and staying are manifestation of a person's autonomous choice. And what truly matters is the ability to choose where to live. This is a groundbreaking framework that puts human dignity at the center. On the other hand, the World Bank's World Development Report takes a more practical approach. Human mobility is determined by the matching of skills needed in the destination country with the skills of migrants, that is need matching. When needs matching is high and there are many opportunities to utilize those skills in the destination country, there is a high possibility of sustained positive relationship between the sending and receiving countries. However, when needs matching is weak and fear is the motivation for human mobility, the cost of human mobility is high and the burden on the sending and receiving countries cannot be expected. The report emphasizes the importance of international cooperation to share this burden in a sustainable manner. I believe the argument resonates with all of us there. However, what we need to think more deeply about the method of international cooperation. The organization represented by today's speakers are the ones taking the initiative in international cooperation, and we at JICA are also continuing our efforts. Nevertheless, why is it that safe and secure human mobility corridors have not yet been realized, and we still do not live in a world where lives, livelihoods, and dignity are guaranteed? Moreover, can a world where such guarantees truly be realized through an environment centered on skill magic, as suggested by the World Bank? Furthermore, despite the self-evident importance of international cooperation, why is it not progressing as desired? At this point, we need to pause and consider from what perspective we should view the aspiration and capabilities of refugees and migrants. The status and relationship of refugees and migrants and those involved with them transport throughout the human mobility process. At each point, the aspiration and capabilities of not only the refugees and migrants, but also involved with them influence each other and are also constantly transforming. From this dynamic perspective, should we really construct an international cooperation framework based solely on matching the condition at the point of departure with the migrants' relationships? Above all, we must not forget that human security applies to all people involved, not just the refugees and migrants, regardless of the reason for human mobility. Unless the lives, livelihoods, and dignity of all people are guaranteed at every moment, even if things seem fine in the short term, stable continuity cannot be expected. When we return this perspective, we need to re-examine what safe and secure human mobility corridors truly mean. In today's forum, I would like to think deeply with all of you about this fundamental issue. First, UNHCR will introduce the specific strategy they have developed to respond to mixed movements of refugees and migrants, the route-based approach. UNHCR has recently established the Asylum and Human Mobility Section, Division of International Protection, Policy and Law Services as a department to implement initiatives related to mixed movements of refugees and migrants. This route-based approach is a new approach aimed at strengthening protection and solution along the entire human mobility route, from the country of origin through transit countries to the final country of destination. It is collaborative response by UNHCR, IOM, national governments, and partner organizations, and concrete route-based field-level response aimed at combating smuggling and trafficking, ensuring access to asylum, and promoting regional cooperation and responsibility sharing. I believe it is truly a strategy aimed at developing safe and secure corridors for all people. Next, IOM will share insights from a 5-year route-based study on human mobility in the East and Horn of Africa. This study tracks and analyzes human mobility routes themselves, rather than the conventional country-based or regional-based approach. It is an integrated study of various categories of people, including refugees, migrants, and internally displaced persons, and a detailed examination of the complex interdependency between origin, transit, and destination. It focusing on a dynamic human mobility process, capturing human mobility as a dynamic line rather than static one. Finally, JICA will present insights from our research on the impact of skill-focused human mobility policies, which are considered an effective means of human mobility targeting Indonesia. We would like to specifically examine the skill myth, which considers acquiring skill as a shortcut to safe and secure human mobility. Now let us think together with all of you about safe and secure mobility corridors for all people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saito, for the introduction and all of the outline of this seminar. So next, let's move on to the next agenda. Let me invite Ms. Valerie Svobodova, UNHCR, for question number 1, initiatives on mixed migration, as Dr. Saito explained. So Ms. Valerie, please, over to you.
Thank you so much, dear colleagues, and konnichiwa. It's a pleasure to be here with you today and present on the roots-based approach and with special focus on the region Asia-Pacific. So let me start by saying that the roots-based approach has been developed in the past few years jointly between UNHCR and IOM. I'm very pleased that Laura is presenting just right after to complement with a lot of the practical aspects, how we translate the roots-based approach. But it's also a concept that goes much beyond UNHCR and IOM, because it's a whole of organization, whole of society approach, which is comprehensive along the key mobility routes. And I'm going to unpack what it means in practice. So today, I would like to share with you an overview of the routes and populations that are moving along them. Why is it so important to have this mind shift, and why we speak about a roots-based approach? And also give you an overview of some of the operational responses and the opportunities they present to bring more effective protection response to the challenges that people on the move face. So let me start by outlining the key routes and the magnitude actually of the mixed movements. Before doing so, I just want to pause a little bit because I think it would be useful just to clarify also what do we mean when we say mixed movement. And also, what is the difference between a refugee and a migrant? Because they face a lot of similar challenges, but there are also significant differences. So when we refer to mixed movements, those are people that are moving across borders, often in an irregular situation, and the profile of the people, their status may be different. Those can include refugees, migrants, but also stateless persons, victims of trafficking. So those people may take the same routes, but have different situations. So it's important to have complementary and comprehensive approaches and response to their situation and their needs. So refugee, what is really the core difference between a refugee and a migrant is that the refugees are fleeing their country of origin to escape persecution, conflict, violence. They are really forced to flee their home. They cross the international border, and they are in need of international protection because their country of origin cannot or is unwilling to provide the protection. So UNHCR has a special mandate in regards to the protection of refugees, and refugees can be recognized, of course, under different frameworks, but the international refugee law is key reference for everybody with complementary national legislation. On the side, to mark the difference with migrants who choose to move across the borders for work, or it may be related to education and family. So there is no the element of persecution. So it's usually driven by the economic reasons, but it doesn't mean that they don't face challenges or they don't have specific protection needs. Of course, they do as well. But there is no the aspect of persecution, fleeing conflict. It's driven by it can be by poverty, economic reasons, other types of hardship, natural disaster, etc. So now that we have seen the definitions, let me show you a map of the main mixed movements that we see currently across the globe, noting that those routes are also evolving and changing with time because they depend on a lot of factors. But we have several routes leading towards Europe. So the central Mediterranean from north of Africa towards Europe. We have the Western Atlantic route from West Africa towards Europe. But we have also routes that go to South Africa, so the Southern Africa routes that you see on the map here, and then all the routes in Americas. And I would speak a bit more about the three routes that are relevant for to the Asia-Pacific region. I should say that you hear me refer to the routes-based approach. In some regions, we refer to them, for example, such as panoramic approach, which is the case in Asia-Pacific region, so very relevant for us today, or a hemispheric approach in the Americas. And you may ask me, why do we have slightly different terminology for different regions? This is really because we want to capture the contextualized essence of the roots-based approach. So we want to make sure that this is contextualized as much as possible. So let me now zoom in a little bit on the roots in our region. We have two routes and that are initiated from Myanmar and Bangladesh, and one of them is going south, so towards India and Sri Lanka. The second one to Southeast Asia, up to Malaysia, Indonesia, etc. And those are mainly driven by refugees and asylum seekers from Myanmar. You may know that there are over 1.4 million refugees and asylum seekers from Myanmar in the sub-region, most of them in Bangladesh, Malaysia, India, then followed by Thailand and Indonesia. But to give a magnitude of this route and the dynamics, you may see the graph on the right side of the slide, where we see the evolution over the past few years. And there is a net increase, nearly 150% in terms of number of individuals, in terms of maritime movements. So there is a steady increase every year. And unfortunately, this route is very deadly, very dangerous. We have seen nearly 60% increase of people who died on this route as compared last year to 2023. So really a lot of risks that people undertake as they move along this route. And we expect that the number of people moving along those routes will increase going forward, especially also as the funding and in this context, it has been significantly reduced in 2025. The third route is the Southwest Asia panoramic route. So this one initiates in Afghanistan, and people are moving then onwards through Pakistan, through Iran, towards Europe, through the Western Balkans. So it's a mixed route. You see on the slide that most of the nationalities represent people from Afghanistan, the top nationalities, but followed then by Pakistanis, Iranians, Bangladeshi, etc. So this is really a mixed route from Asia coming towards Europe. We see on the left in the graph over the past 5 years, depicting the land and sea arrivals to Europe through the routes. Proportionally, this route, while the numbers remain lower compared to the central Mediterranean route, for example, the proportion is increasing, as you see, every year. So we have more and more people as well that are undertaking this route. In the past 5 years, this is about 150,000 people, and we expect that this trend of increase of using this route will also go up in the years to come. Here, finally, I would like just to show an example of the mapping of protection risks we do along the key routes. So I took an example, as you see, from the routes coming to Europe from different parts of Africa. And we see the magnitude of the protection risks that have been reported in various locations around the route. So the bigger the circle, the more risks have been reported. And those include specific risks such as death, gender-based violence, including rape, physical violence, abduction. So there are a lot of protection challenges and life-threatening situations that people face as they are moving along those routes. Let me now move to share and reflect a little bit why there is a need to shift to this routes-based approach as compared to more traditional approach that we have been undertaking thus far. So the magnitude of number of refugees, but of course also migrants worldwide, is increasing. UNHCR has just released yesterday our global trends report, so unprecedented numbers of forcibly displaced persons across the world. But at the same time, the border management is increasingly challenging. The system is overwhelmed, and there are also gaps in terms of collaboration. So a new, more comprehensive approach is needed, looking at the specific contextualized challenges along the route. And we, of course, don't start from scratch. We build on all the practices thus far, but it's complemented with new measures, concrete initiatives, and with heavy involvement of the states, of course, and national and local actors, amongst others, NGOs, etc. So this contextualized approach is then translated into, for example, a panoramic approach in Asia-Pacific region, hemispheric approach in Americas, and other modalities as required by specific routes. So what is really the imperative of the routes-based approach? The shift is that we are not looking necessarily anymore at a single country. So we focus on the whole of route approach. This is very important because it's a continuum. It's a continuum from the countries of origin, asylum, transit, destination, and it's important to look at it in a more holistic way so that we can bring efficient protection and solution responses. We also shift to a lot of more nuanced trends and data analysis, and Laura will present you some of the examples that give us more evidence-based information for programming. And we are really trying in the roots-based approach to look at the responses in a more comprehensive way. What I mean by that is that it's not about responses in one country, then another country, etc. It's to see how people move, what are their needs, and how we can bring the response as much as possible early when along the route, so that people don't need to suffer and be exposed to protection services until they finally reach some kind of a protection response. It's also important to look beyond only the humanitarian response, so look at the engagement with peace actors, development actors, variety of expertise that can bring this comprehensive response and be more open to collaborations, including with the private sector, regional organizations, but above all the states, and that are key in making a lasting impact. So if I should summarize, the three objectives of the roots-based approach are the following. First, saving lives, protect and reduce harm so that people are not falling victims of traffickers, smugglers, and other protection situations as they move on the route. Second, as much as possible, increase alternatives to dangerous journeys for refugees and migrants. So provide safe and regular pathways and alternatives so that people don't need to go through risking their life on the route. And three, really investment in supporting the states in managing the mixed movements. In practice, those three objectives are translated into 6 pillars of interventions. And this speaks to the continuum I referred to at the beginning, where we look at the entry and admission. Then we go into the systems, the asylum system and migration management, making sure that the protection response is adequate and is comprehensive. We look at the inclusion and development aspects of people on the move, the safe, regular, and complementary pathways, and then finally solutions, return, voluntary repatriation, and reintegration. In the context of Asia Pacific, there is actually a 7th pillar at the beginning, which looks at the conditions in the countries of origin, because the more we can stabilize the situation in the countries of origin, invest in their systems and protection frameworks, the less exposed people would be in undertaking those dangerous journeys. On the slide, you have some examples of the activities, what each of the pillar means, and we can discuss them more in the discussion session. So briefly, let me just highlight some of the elements of the operationalization responses along the routes. What is really essential, and this is a key core element of the roots-based approach, is the communication with communities. How do we channel relevant information to people on the move? How do we tailor it to their needs in their language, through the channels that are accessible to them? How do we engage with a variety of actors, including the host communities, diaspora? And we are having some good practices, such as the Telling the Real Story project and its adaptation for mixed movements context. So very important element on the communication with communities. The second element is around data. I mentioned that this is a cornerstone of the roots-based approach. So as to be able to provide a comprehensive and targeted response along the route, we need to know exactly where people are moving, why, what are their protection concerns, to be able to program better. And Laura from IOM will showcase really how this works in practice, but it's a core element of our work on the roots-based approach. Strategic partnerships, it's not only about UNHCR and IOM at all. It's about how, as a humanitarian and development community, we are able to adapt our programs and approaches and make this mind shift to respond to the current realities in the world, that people are moving, and we need to be more attentive, more predictable how we respond to their needs. There is also a modality that we call multipurpose hubs. You may have heard also I am referring to them as migrants resource centers, which are really quite an innovative way how we provide services for people moving along the mixed movement routes. How do we provide services in this new context? How we can adapt to the fact that they may be preferring digital services? How to set up services along the key routes that can be attentive to their needs that are tailored to mixed movement. So I could give some examples in our discussion part from some of the regions, how this works in practice. And I mentioned several times, and I refer to the digitalization. So it's a more longer term aspiration, of course, and it's very contextualized, but we are developing a digital gateway, which is basically a way how to bring also the services closer and quicker to people on the move, where they can access on their phones, on through a device, a lot of the services information, receive some of the service provision, including cash or register for some of the services. So we are really trying to adapt and make it more accessible, impactful for people on the move. So let me stop here with this brief introduction on the roots-based approach or panoramic approach in the regional context of Asia Pacific, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Valerie, for your kind explanation about the mixed migration and also the route-based approach. And then next year, let's move on to the next agenda. Let me invite Ms. Laura Nistri, IOM, for the question number 2, migration routes and migrants. So Ms. Laura, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Apologies. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you again for this opportunity to present the key findings from 5 years of route-based research in the Eastern Horn of Africa region. So this, when we speak about the Eastern Horn of Africa region and the migration routes that I'm going to introduce, we really mostly indicate irregular journey, or anyway migrants who maybe can be regular or irregular in different phases of their movement. But you will see, as I will introduce, characteristics, risks, opportunities, as well as success stories of this type of migration processes, that many of them are mostly without document or without regular visa or in different irregular situation throughout these journeys. The research started in 2019 and ended in 2023, so it was quite an ambitious process that targeted the 3 main inter-regional migration routes in the Eastern Horn of Africa region. The most used and busiest one is the Eastern route, the one that goes mostly from Ethiopia and Somalia to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia by crossing from Djibouti, mostly Obok and Bosaso in Puntland, Somalia, to the Gulf of Aden, onward in war-torn Yemen, and mostly reaching Saudi Arabia. These migration routes mostly used over 90% by Ethiopians, and to give a sense, we have an average, or we estimate that an average of at least 150,000 individuals would, so at times it has even been higher of the Central Mediterranean route in terms of crossing, we can define it or consider it a comparatively cheap and quick migration journey, because the distance are quite limited as compared, you would see, at the other routes, and therefore even the cost would be more, let's say, reduced as compared to the other one. I should add that this route is also highly bidirectional. In fact, as many migrants try to reach or decide, because sometimes they don't manage to reach Saudi Arabia, there are regular deportation since many years that are taking place to return migrants back to Ethiopia, and in cases also Somalia, but mostly to Ethiopia. The other route that we focus is the southern route, and it was also mentioned by my colleague Valerie, and this presentation could not follow better after such a powerful conceptual and programmatic introduction of the route-based approach. Then it's the core of how this whole research initiative has been designed to really try to understand and follow the migrants from origin to transit until final destination when possible, in order to understand how they were making that decision-making process, how their journey was shifted according to different risks or opportunities, or even the need to maybe stop in order to look for an employment, in order to have resources to continue the journey, and also related to their return and integration process. So, as I was mentioning, the southern route is the one that goes from the Eastern Horn of Africa to South Africa, very long, as you can understand, because it has to cross 5 to 6 countries, many of them with restrictive migration policies, where irregular migration is treated under criminal law. And therefore, this route requires far more planning and preparation and resources in order to be engaged with. And finally, one of the most instead known or visible to the whole international media and overall partners community, that is the northern route. That is the one that goes from the eastern, in our case, the Eastern Horn of Africa, to North Africa, and before mostly through Sudan, for what concerned the Eastern Horn of Africa migrants, so mostly Ethiopian, Eritreans, and Somali using this route, then to North Africa, and eventually onward to Europe. This is, we would see that the characteristics of the migrants on the move on this route is somehow different from the others. It was a mixed method research throughout the different phases, and we have published 13 briefing papers or reports out of these studies, but what I'm going to discuss or present today, it is our last one, where we have tried to draw key lessons or key messages from all these years of data collection, analysis, and observation. And what we've tried to do is really to crystallize or identifying the main high-level learnings that not only could support to understand the complexity and the variety and even the human side, that's very powerful, of these movements, but also to try to understand which are exactly if there were any difference and how these routes and the migrants on the move along them were characterizing themselves. We have therefore identified the 10 key messages. I will then go more in depth on few of them, and I'll just provide an overview of our key findings. It is clear that migration drivers are complex and interlinked. Therefore, such a decision to engage migrants as rational actors, they play a lot of agency in the decision-making process to engage in such long and risky journey, but most often there are multiple reasons. They can be economic, the most relevant one, but conflict, as mentioned by Valerie, and violence, but also environmental factors that all of them interact in order to make the decision for a member of a household to engage in such a journey. And migration is an expensive undertaking. It's not taken, they require resources. So usually they're not the poorest in the society that would engage in such type of movement. There are a lot of successful stories, and we know this is the positive side, is the power of migration, that migrants reach destination, migrants are able to find a job and employment, and then remit money that then will help their family and communities at origin, that then can buy a plot, can buy a car, and therefore improve their well-being. And this positive narrative is the one that sparks migration desire, and therefore they would maybe push or led other members of the community to engage in the path of their other fellow community members or family. This migration journey are not linear. They are not a single process as they start. They're most often, as mentioned, they're fragmented. What can be a destination country or a destination area can then become a transit one, because we would see, as in the case of Sudan, conditions can change, such as a civil war, abruptly, or migrants for even for labor needs. Maybe they would need decide that they will need to move onward to find better access to services, to find new living or livelihood opportunities. Migration networks are crucial in order to determine and to support this kind of movement. With migration networks, we indicate all the information, financial support, even connection with the smuggler, which smuggler overall, they provide a service to the migrants in order to reach countries that otherwise would not be able to access through regular pathways or through regular visa. But we know that while overall smugglers can entail the significant risk and abuses according to the condition and how they treat the migrants. And the migrants here can significantly lose their agency or capacity to decide where and when to move. And most often, we know very well stories about Libya, but also in Yemen, migrants can be kidnapped, migrants, so therefore the request for ransom that further indebt the migrant and the family who have been supporting this movement. This is a very common statement, but it's interesting how our research speaks to that. The migrants, all of them, would rather migrate regularly if they could access and if they exist and access regular pathways. And we will see that in the Eastern Horn of Africa, for many of the population that we have, migrant groups that we have studied, there were very little regular migration pathways or accessible ones that they could use in order to engage in a migration journey. it goes without saying that migrants face a plethora of risk and abuses and throughout this regular journey. Given the fact that, of course, they cannot access the social services, they cannot access health services at times. They are therefore, at the end of, as I said, it could be smugglers, it could be traffickers, but it could also be that they could find themselves, in a desert or without enough just food, water, or basic means in order, to continue their journey. And so they expose themselves to a significant amount of risk. Notwithstanding that, we know that many migrants, they know this risk. As I said, migrants are very rational agent. They are aware of most of the risk. Maybe not all, as we know. We have, well, of course, here the literature and also our research has many rich findings, but they know that anyway the decision to migrate irregularly comes with risk, but they are so, one of them, desperate by the lack of opportunities and of livelihood means at home, that they feel, they rationally understand that migration is the only way in which they can try to make a difference for themselves and their families. And therefore, it is this desire to change their life that push them, make them decide to migrate anyway. Of course, company children are among the most vulnerable and in danger in this process, because many of them would take, that is mostly along the eastern route. Many of them, they would decide to migrate with very little preparation. Here we have dropout from school, and even there is a big reflection that we can do on the role of education, or how education is perceived by these migrants in the different routes. But many of them, therefore, they have little preparation in terms of the logistics, which smuggler they will use, as well as resources. And then many of them will decide even to leave without informing their families. And then they will contact them only when they need money, and therefore, most likely, they've been in a risky, not necessarily kidnapped, but anyway, ransom, but any other, or paying, for instance, to cross with a boat from Obok to Yemen, and therefore they will create again the spiral maybe of an increase in debt in terms of repaying back the cost of this migration journey. Our findings shows that gender plays a very relevant role across all the routes, and I will talk more about that. And finally, we should not forget that if we think about this is a route, and we say this continuum of the migration movement, and therefore from origin to transit until destination. But then there is also the return journey, or coming back to these communities. And we have investigated or further research that, of course, the nature of the return movement is crucial in determining the success of their reintegration process. Whether a migrant has reached final destination or was able to find a job and then remit back home and therefore support their families and pay back the debt, instead of a migrant that was maybe kidnapped or anyway never was able to find, to never reach the intended final destination, can lead to very different perception and even attitude when the migrants goes back home. And here we have plenty as well of evidence related to the stigma and lack of acceptance, and then therefore sometimes also the decision to remigrate further. Once, of course, also because most often the conditions at home have not changed in terms of lack of opportunities and capacity, to find a decent livelihood. I will not speak about all of them because that would take far more about the time of this seminar. I would just touch upon 3 of these key messages. So there is a massive literature and discussion on drivers. As mentioned, drivers are complex, are interlaid, and the main migrant group, not the only one, but the main one that we have investigated are Ethiopians. Ethiopians, we studied them both at origin, going back in their communities of origin to see which was the impact of migration, both in terms of those going, so migrant, family with migrant abroad, as well as in the case of migrant returnees that have already come back. And in the case of Ethiopia, of course, the so-called macro level or the macro drivers, micro level drivers are very powerful. There are demographic pressures, there are unemployment, under unemployment, lack of access in many areas to basic services, land degradation, or anyway little or not enough land plots in order to sustain families, as well as we know that Ethiopia suffered different droughts. One of the largest in the eastern horn of Africa was just 2 years ago, affecting large part Ethiopia as well as Somalia and Kenya. Therefore, we have very strong, even here, environmental drivers as well as conflict and violence. Ethiopia has been cyclically, it's a very large country, is the second largest population in Africa, so over 100 million individuals. So there were even multiple, such as the Tigray conflict from 2002 in the north of the country, but many others even in other countries. Also conflict and violence play a role here. But we can say that in the case, for instance, of the migrants on the move on the eastern route to Saudi Arabia, labor migration or the desire to find, of course, a job and employment is by far the strongest. Also because in Saudi Arabia, there is a structural demand for low-skilled labor. And with this, I indicate domestic worker for women or elderly care. And in the case of men, for agriculture, shepherding, gardening, which act as a very strong magnet for the Ethiopian migrants. In the southern route, economic drivers are again by far the most powerful. Communities mostly deciding to migrate south are in the southern part of Ethiopia. So that is very interesting, and it's clear. It's not that a migrant usually the communities or the areas where migrants, so geography, smuggler networks, network dynamics with communities at destination determine already in which direction and where a migrant would decide or try to migrate. So in the case of southern Ethiopia, this is mostly, we have really communities that have been migrating already for several years down to South Africa, and they're very strong diaspora community in such as in Johannesburg, a large city in South Africa, that really act as facilitator, as mentioned, to support this migration journey. And therefore, these meso-level drivers in terms of connection and support during this migration journey are key to determine the movement along this route. As a strike difference to what I've just said, there is the northern route. The northern route was, when I speak about the northern route, we were doing research in Sudan just before the conflict broke out. The conflict, the current civil war in Sudan broke out in April 2023. Sudan is currently the largest displacement crisis in the globe. We speak about over 11 million internally displaced individuals, and nearly to 4 million individuals have instead exit the country. And here we have, of course, a great majority of refugees, but we also have South Sudanese returnees. We also have third country national. Therefore, Sudan in itself, it is a migration crisis, a displacement crisis, and a refugee crisis. It's a very complex mobility landscape. But even before this tragic civil war, it was our research finding shows that violence and conflict, therefore mixed driver more than just economic one, were far more present across this route. In this case, we study Ethiopian, Eritrean, and then also Sudanese. And many of them, you know, they were affected by different conflict in the bordering area of Ethiopia and Eritrea. Many of them, as in the case of Eritrea, they cannot go back to their origin country. Just before the conflict broke out, there was 1.1 million refugees in Sudan. and therefore a far more complex dynamic along this route that then, when the conflict broke out, led to a significant reshift of the routes and the movement that then of these migrants, that many of them had to flee and find safety either in Egypt or down to South Sudan, and some of them who had resources would decide to keep on migrating along the central Mediterranean route. I would like also to deliver a few words about regular pathways that really touch upon the core of today's seminar, and its regular pathways are key in order to have a healthy migration process, not only for the migrants themselves, but also for the country that received them. In that migrants, regular migrants can access services, as mentioned. They can even engage in circular migration and therefore go back. Not only sending remittances back home is far cheaper than being irregular, but they even can, go back to their communities of origin and have a far more healthy, as mentioned, migration journey. And it was quite striking how most of the migrants were aware of the risk, as mentioned, of migrating regularly, but they mentioned that they were not able to access them, or there were not actually regular pathways available to them. Along the eastern route, most we interviewed out of 75% of the migrants on the move along this route are male. And they were saying that there are no regular pathways available to them because most of the bilateral labor agreements between Ethiopia and Saudi Arabia are for women only. In fact, they're most about domestic worker, as well as I said, elderly care, and therefore for men there are very little regular opportunities. But at the same time, even when interviewing women, the other 25% is women, and the women were saying that yes, they were available to them, but they were not able to access them because many of them, they lack legal identity and therefore passport or other way in order, to apply for these opportunities. Or sometimes in Ethiopia, there are some educational requirements connected to apply to the documents, and they were not reaching them. Or they were also mentioning that, think about the size of Ethiopia, that even when this call for application managed by recruitment agencies were open, these were, they were cyclical, they were not always available, they were cyclical, and they were of course accessible only for migrants, for aspiring migrants that of course had some technological capacity or anyway access to the means to apply. In the case of the northern route, instead, here, as I mentioned, the population of refugees, asylum seekers was far more prevalent. And here, of course, the migrants that we interviewed, they mentioned they've been trying and waiting for years for resettlement opportunities or for alternative legal pathways, such as family reunification, education opportunities, or labor, but that these processes were very lengthy. After maybe 10 years of waiting, nothing had, there were very limited quotas through accepting refugees through this mobility scheme or protection scheme. On the top of it, Sudan has an encampment policy in place. Therefore, refugees should remain or are expected, in order to apply for this mechanism, are expected to live inside the camps where there are limited livelihood opportunities. And therefore, out of the 1.1 million refugee population in Sudan before the current conflict, only less than 40% was living in camp. The rest was living, therefore, in different urban settings. Many of them, they have entered and not apply anyway, or access or seek refuge in a camp anyway from the beginning, so therefore were not accessible. And therefore, again, when it was, maybe if I have a minute, it was also very interesting how, since we conducted the condition for migrants in Sudan had changed already significantly following the fall of al-Bashir. And the economic situation had dramatically changed in country. Sudan was a country of destination in itself before the conflict, and you can understand how that is complicated the decision-making process in the roots. Gender, just one word also on the gender component of this movement, because this one is also very relevant. I've already mentioned the Eastern route and how this is highly gendered, with bilateral labor agreement mostly accessible only for female migrants and male instead having mostly to move irregularly. But even along the southern route, it's a very long and dangerous journey. There are some migrants who also fly to Mozambique, because Mozambique there is a free visa regime, and they would just do the final leg through smugglers network. But usually women are mostly flying and going to South Africa for marriage purpose. Also because the labor demand in South Africa is not seen as suitable for women, because it's very usually their physical jobs, such as construction even there, or anyway transport, or working even in shops. And there is an increasing xenophobia that is very, very reported as well in South Africa towards an anti-migrant sentiment. And therefore, this is a route mostly, as mentioned, used by men, and female may rejoin later on. I'll be happy, of course, to expand on any of the other findings and topics later on in the discussion session, as it can be found of interest. Just a few words on the Global Compact on Migration on this. As already introduced by the initial speaker, and overall, there are many frameworks, and some of them are binding, some of them are not binding. The Global Compact on Migration is composed of 23 objectives that aims at improving migration governance and promoting safe, orderly and regular migration. It is connected with the target 10.7 of the Sustainable Development Goal, and it really aimed to advance better condition and access and protection for migrants. And our research findings talk to many of these objectives. Of course, no point to expand about data and the importance of a solid evidence base in order to design and contextualize to the different conditions, migrant protection needs, as well as different dynamics along this route. So the importance of a solid and continuous evidence base that inform programming, coordination, and targeting of the various interventions. I have not touched upon the drivers, the drivers meaning the risk along this route, but as well, there is plenty of them, as I said, from migrant requiring health assistance, or just in need of basic water and food, or anyway protection services along this route. Some of them, migrants can be in hidden houses or safe houses, as they call it, or they can be even left in the middle of the forest at the risk of being attacked from animals. So there are plenty, these journeys are very long, or just be in the middle, in the hand of traffickers or smugglers, and therefore the importance to continue providing contextualized services that can address these adverse drivers and vulnerabilities along this journey. Most relevant to this is access to legal identity and to documents, because already with that, migrants are far more able to exercise an agency on how they can decide to migrate, and therefore the expansion and strengthening of civil registration system, or all other mechanisms that can allow migrants then to migrate regularly. Expansion of legal pathways, because then this is at the core of all this discussion. Even, for instance, in the case of the southern route, we interviewed migrants in Tanzania, and there is the free visa regime between Ethiopia and Kenya. But none of the migrants that we interviewed had applied for a free visa, because again, the administrative hurdles and processes were far more complex and long rather than use a smuggler and crossing down to Kenya. So the expansion of regular pathways is not just about the labor opportunities, but also to make them more administrative as well as financially, because therefore there are significant fees associated to them, to the interested migrant population. And finally, even better condition in terms of recruitment and work for the migrant in the destination countries, and so to promote and safeguard from the recruitment process, the training and the skills to then the whole phase. Finally, this is the various publications that I've mentioned. I have focused on our last one that we just released online, but as mentioned, there are many other publications that have supported, underpinned these various research processes and the various phases. And thank you so much for this opportunity, and I look forward to contribute to the discussion session. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Laura, for your presentation. And actually, we are behind of the schedule, so that let's move on to the next agenda. Also, we are inviting the Dr. Saito, JICA, for the question number 3, skills and migrants. So, Dr. Saito, please.
Okay, let's start on my presentation. Today, I would like to take a moment to consider the skill development, which has been recognized as a key factor in ensuring safe and dignified mobility for people from diverse backgrounds. Frameworks for skill-based mobility, such as global skills partnership and qualification frameworks, have been promoted, and many receiving countries have incorporated skills into their criteria for accepting labor migrants. As a result, sending countries are also focusing on improving people's skills. A similar trend can be seen in Indonesia, one of our research target countries, where various migration policy reforms have been implemented with the goal of sending skilled workers. However, our research suggests that the deification of skills is having a negative impact. So let's take a look at the need to reconsider skills from a human security perspective while introducing actual research results. We have done three researches. One is database analysis and field research and structured questionnaire survey. Through our research, our results reveal a skill-focused migration policy and exploitative structure that takes advantage of it. And to increase the value of overseas workers, the Indonesian government is shifting its focus to developing and promoting skill profiles of its citizens. The aim is to ensure that workers are respected as skilled individuals and are guaranteed better lives and rights at their places of employment. To this end, the government has been prioritizing skills through measures such as mandatory vocational training, mandatory acquisition of skill certificates, and strengthening of vocational training institutions by separating vocational training function from sending functions. The Indonesian government has established a series of procedures for working abroad. Once the government approves the job information from the sending agent, local recruitment begins. Those who wish to work abroad must receive training in accordance with the skill requirements of the job information, obtain a certificate, and register with the sending agent. Starting 2020, it has become impossible to obtain a worker ID and proceed with preparation for dispatch without skill certificate. In other words, to work abroad, it is essential to understand the complex procedures and acquire the required skill certification. However, for this new system to be effective, it is essential that the skill requirements and how to acquire them are clearly stated in the job information. If this information is unclear or incorrect, even if you acquire the skills, they may not be able to obtain the certification necessary for sending. While the government emphasizes skills in the procedure for working abroad, to increase effectiveness, it is essential to clarify information on skill requirements and certification methods. Otherwise, the process will only become more complicated, and there is a risk of not acquiring the appropriate skills and missing the opportunity to work abroad. Looking at the job information posted on the government-run overseas employment portal site reveals the problems. For example, even for job openings in the same occupation, the required skills and qualification differ, and for job openings with higher salaries, the requirements for years of experience and language proficiency are not clearly stated. In addition, there is a lack of detailed information about the qualification required. For agricultural qualification in Japan, the only information available is on the website of the Japanese organization. Moreover, there were cases where the language proficiency requirements stated in the job information were lower than the level actually required. With such ambiguous and erroneous job information, it is extremely difficult for workers to find appropriate training schools and proceed with preparations. In the end, they have no choice but to rely on local recruiters and people close to them, and possibility of finding an appropriate training school becomes extremely low. Then, when workers try to register with a sending agency after obtaining an inappropriate skill certificate, they are told that they cannot register with that skill and are required to retrain. This creates a structure where workers are forced to undergo double training. In other words, the reform of the system aimed at improving workers' skills is actually resulting in the exploitation of workers' time and money. And as for the important training faction, there are only 282 high-quality public vocational training centers nationwide, with 37 concentrated in Java and Jakarta. The competition ratio of enrollment is as high as 100-1, and students are forced to wait for up to 6 months. On the other hand, private training schools are simple and require retraining, with an average of 2.5 enrollments per person. It was found that the accumulating costs lead many abandon their employment aspiration. The environment has not kept pace with the skill-focused policy. The focus on skill has led to the concentration of authority in the physical capable sending agents and increased collusion with training center. As Figure 1 shows, while sending agents in Jakarta and Java have high fulfillment rates, sending agents are not established in regions with low human development indices. As shown in Figure 2, workers from other provinces have no choice but to move to Jakarta or Java and proceed with preparation without income. On the other hand, the capabilities of those seeking overseas employment are promoting an exploitative structure. As shown in Figure 3, workers with less education experience tend to rely on limited sources of information. When we ask prospective workers how they choose training centers and sending agents, we found that those with higher education experience working abroad gather information widely on their own to make decisions, while workers with lower education and no experience depend on the limited information obtained from people close to them. And for workers who have never left their province since birth and belong to a strong community, if the community itself is incorporated in an exploitative structure, it becomes almost impossible to break out of that structure. In fact, in one community where religious leaders have a great deal of influence, despite the fact that many low-wage workers are being sent out under poor conditions through religious network, and many victims are being created every year, the situation has not been able to be changed. Thus, the problem is that the less access workers have to education, experience, and information, the more likely they are to be caught up in the exploitative structure, and the more difficult it is for them to break free. So far, we have examined communities' choice of sending routes, policy frameworks, and training enhancement, and the role of sending agents. The result revealed that emphasis on skill is creating a structure that exploits workers' time and money, and is not leading to the promotion of safe and secure mobility corridor. To achieve safe and secure mobility corridor, it is necessary to understand that skills are defined by social structure and are not a panacea. And rather than technical skills, it is important to focus on the capability to use the right knowledge in the right way to avoid exploitation, and to create a structure where various stakeholders, not just specific ones, can be involved in sending. Furthermore, to ensure transparency in the sending process, monitoring by diverse stakeholders is required. Skills can be said to be an effective tool for workers. However, it must be understood by all that just because you have skill does not mean that your life, livelihood, and dignity are guaranteed, and that regardless of whether a person has skills or not, their life, livelihood, and dignity must be guaranteed. We must never deify skills, and we must rethink this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Saito. Yes, then next agenda is, let me invite the Dr. Fala, Waseda University, for the reaction to those questions raised by 3 presenters. So Dr. Fala, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for these very wonderful presentations. Because I worked with Dr. Saito on the project, so I know a little bit about her project, but two presentations on this route-based migration, I think are truly very inspiring. And also, I was just thinking how I could react to these presentations. And I think one thing that Dr. Saito mentioned, and I wholly agree, is that I think in the whole migration process, whether it's in the whichever route the migrants take, it's always involved different stakeholders. So I think I tentatively just call this same migratory journey and different dreams. And I feel that since the theme of today is human insecurity, so I was thinking that actually this sort of insecurities, the risks, the safety issues actually take place in the logical gaps that different stakeholders actually embrace. So, sorry. Okay. So I think basically migration is a multiple stakeholder event, right? Different actors have diverse logics and the goals. So here I just provide very simple kind of graphs. You have a source government, a source region government, you have a receiving government, you have migrants and families, you have a migration industry, people who actually were the brokers, who the coyotes, who people who try to kind of help or facilitate migration, and also you have employers on the receiving end. So I think, we have many more, and for the humanitarian journey. So, for example, we also have a lot of NGOs, humanitarian workers, etc., helping out in the event. So, I think the main thing I listened to Ms. Nistri, and also especially Ms. Nistri's very detailed presentations on your wonderful, very rich projects. Is that especially the publications you show in the end, I think there are 2 words that strike me very deeply. As one is the risks. I think some of the titles of books end with risks, and some books end with dreams. I think these really this kind of what the discussion here, the human-based migration. You base your focal point, your empirical focus is the individuals and families who are migrating. So for these people, I think obviously they have a lot of aspirations. They want the financial security. They want physical security. They want to build skills and build careers and all kinds of dreams. At the same time, I think they are also more willing to take risks because with all that sort of aspirations and a lot of social network feedback loops that increase their longings for a life. But they sometimes, they do not realize that how much effort that will take, how many difficulties that will entail. And that actually is where the risks actually emerge. And so, but I think we cannot forget that the migration journey and the other two key words that you mentioned is a regularity. The regular migration is really the key to human security, to safe journey. The other is really a legal identity, which these two are linked. So I think when you actually mention that, it's very important to recognize that the receiving countries, right, the receiving ends, they need to actually provide that kind of legal framework for the human security. So I obviously I'm based in Japan, so my understanding of the whole situation is very much kind of maybe skewed to the Asian and Japan context. So for receiving countries such as Japan, who is now trying to encourage a lot of labor migration, as well as start receiving more evacuees, conflict evacuees, as well as refugees, or at least the country hopes to be able to do this. I think that the two main kind of phrases can characterize Japan's movement. One is the neoliberal nationalism, which actually yesterday we also had a symposium where Christian Jopke, Professor Jopke's main thesis of contemporary migration policy in liberal democracies is neoliberal nationalism. Neoliberal is basically very market-oriented, private sector centered kind of approach to migration, and the nationalism obviously is how to protect the kind of national interest, which is represented by a lot of populist movement. We can see the whole world in the West, in U.S., you have this trend leaning toward a more protective anti-migration sentiment, which I think for all the good, all the people with good wills like us, right, who want to encourage migration, want to ensure safe migration, we cannot ignore this trend. And so the receiving ends are closing their doors, essentially. The other is a neoliberal humanitarianism, which I wrote in a recent paper with Professor Wendy Perlman and a student of mine from Syria, al-Masuri, we call him Masuri, to describe actually one of the JICA programs here as to receiving Syrian refugees, right, as international students. So we studied their different cohorts of these students, and we consider this a part of this complementary pathway for refugees. And we noticed that yes, the state tries to have a kind of path out of humanitarian concerns, but eventually the program is to channel these people into the labor market, right? So they don't have the kind of convention refugee protection, but they are given the opportunity to work in Japan. So it's essentially still a non-refugee status, the employment-oriented settlement. And that actually is a mixed kind of outcomes from our observation. So I think a neoliberal aspect of the current policy should not be ignored. So the other reaction I want to kind of react to also Dr. Saido's comment. This is also related to the neoliberal kind of trend, is that right now, basically the migration is selecting on skills, right? But the skill-based migration in a lot of receiving countries are very static in a sense. They do not see the developmental potential of migrants who can build skills in the journey, in the migratory process, in the past. So I'm not going to get into the details of this, but I try to argue that the skill and the migrant skill in international cross-border migration is actually a socially constructed process, both in terms of the recognition of skills, utility of the skills, as well as the process of building skills. And obviously, a lot of migrants have difficulties to be received as skilled migrants, to be given the kind of jobs that they probably could have with their credentials, have to do with the fact that their skills, because of maybe their race, their gender, because of their credentials, are not being recognized in the receiving end. So a lot of this sort of disappointment, frustrations, and also the aspiration for financial security, oftentimes they lead to disappointment or failure at the receiving end, because they cannot be able, they cannot convert or transfer their education and skills into the kind of economic outcomes, returns. So this is something I think we can also think. I mentioned that in order to ensure security, and it's really important to consider the objectives of the migration state, the receiving end of state. And this is a kind of graph I borrowed from a recent paper by Erin Chen and her colleagues, based on James Hollifield's migration state model. All receiving countries actually have to kind of, in a sense, find migration policies that somehow respond to all these different interests as a nation state. So before, you have culture, security, markets, and also rights. But in the East Asian countries, in particular the post-colonial migration states, right? The new countries, not old kind of liberal democracy. You have concerns of security, you have the concerns of social stability, and also markets' interest, and also this is social contract. The rights are not given. It's negotiated between the states and the individuals. So how can a migration state convince their own population to come up with a rights regime for the newcomers, for the migrants? Isn't an issue all the, especially post-colonial countries are confronted with. So I think my point might be a little bit kind of scattered here, and I'm not tying them very closely, but my main kind of, in a sense, question, and also kind of call for concerns, is that yes, it is really important for people to care about migrants' human securities, but we also need to understand where the human securities come from, where the gaps are, and to what degree the migration state, in the receiving state, and all the states who will see these migrants through have interest in protecting them. The Global Compact is not a binding agreement, and you have to ask all these countries to sign on and to agree to these principles. Right now, in the current political environment, actually, we see the backlash against them. So I think it is really a kind of thing, and all stakeholders need to be together and consider. And so this is something I was thinking what Japan could do. And I think maybe, the social contracts, how we can negotiate a better social contract that requires the people in the country and with the state. And we have to be actually quite careful. I'm working on one big global project, and my colleagues in Argentina are lamenting the fact that it's a failed project of free mobility in South America. Argentina and the South American countries for 20 years had this free mobility zone. So a lot of migrants from those 8 countries, they could move to each other's places and live, enjoy the public service and get citizenship. You know what? With the populist movement, it failed. Now, and who voted for the populist government? It's the new immigrants who became citizens of Argentina. So it is always this sort of, the older comers just don't want newcomers to enjoy the public service they feel that they established. This is real. So we have to consider, and all these different parties involved in the migration trajectory, whose life will be influenced by the migration of all kinds of people. And also in terms of skill, and I think one kind of good, maybe optimistic view on this regardless whether it's refugee or migrant voluntary migration, is to see all those individuals who are moving as a potential skilled workers to see the mobility as a possibility to co-produce, co-develop kind of skills that will be beneficial for both the migrants and for receiving country, and eventually also for descending regions. I think that's also maybe what Professor De Haas calls capability. But I think more concretely, I think as a kind of skills, and Japan actually offers a pretty good social context for that, because Japanese corporations have this tradition to build skills. So we don't need to select people based strictly on their skills, because if we could offer the opportunity to train those people, make them into skilled workers, I think it's a win-win situation for all parties. And I always tell people, oftentimes in my teaching, I say, think of it, the costs. You want to increase the birth rate, and you want women to give birth to 0-year-old babies. It's that 18 years to raise them. And then you can bring in 18-year-old migrants and train them, teach them language. What would be more economically rational, right? So I think from a neoliberal perspective, even for the migration state, I think the trade-off between increasing birth rate and increasing migration is a non-brainer. So this is just my personal take on it, and I hope I'm not frustrating the speakers who really centered on the human securities of the people who are on the move. I totally understand that these people need to, cross borders to seek securities. But at the same time, I think that the expectation for legal status for regular migratory journeys is a very real aspiration. But I think you cannot achieve this without taking into consideration of all the parties and all the states involved. So I think I will stop here. We can further discuss.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fala. Thank you for your reactions here. Yes, then next, let's move on to the next session, which is a panel discussion and Q&A. And because of some schedule behind, we'd like to a little bit extend our symposium schedule, which is, if it's possible, we'd like to have it 15 minutes more until the 16:15. So, and then for the panel discussion, our moderator is Dr. Saito. So, Dr. Saito, over to you.
Thank you, Sam. And so we got a message from Dr. Haas, but I want to read later. So let's go to the discussion part. Thank you for nice and great presentation and raising point from three of you. And so, and we want to explore the potential in more depth in discussion, what specific strengths or resources we can have in Japan, and so, and what we can think about the safe and secure corridor for refugees and migrants. So let's put our heads together and generate some concrete ideas. So first, I would love to hear Ms. Sasaki insights. Please, Sasaki.
Thank you so much. So, from in the context of human security, so how Japanese system is formed, so I would like to introduce. I think that's my job. And at the very beginning, Dr. Saito mentioned so the technical intern training program and revision, and also mentioned there was a mention of human security, and I'd like to talk about these two in accordance with each other. So in Japan, the system of the technical training programs, so it's a very specific perspective with specified skills. So those are foreign workers who have the specific skills. So we, Japanese communities, are proactive to accept those people, and for non-specified skilled workers, so that I assume discussion willing to the government is not willing to accept not a specific skilled worker
in 2022, the new residency status was established.
という着眼
So there was addition of necessity.
の
That means that so labor shortage in Japan, and we can borrow resources from overseas, and the skill level.
が積極的に
So once again, the government was willing to accept the specified skilled worker. However, not so much for
とにする
not skilled workers, but made the skilled workers. They made their shift. And from 1993, this the technical intern training program.
途上国
So this was designed to nurture talents for people from developing countries. So that was the purpose. However,
分野の
so no specific areas.
目的と実態が乖離を
So there was a gap between purpose and the reality. And that point was pointed out from his side and one side. So with the revision of this program, so this is going to be an employment of full skill development. So semi-skilled workers, so part of them
日本で行うという
can be done in Japan.
整理をしたという位置づけでおりでしかも
And on top of that, so this employment was skill development. So we can nurture from ground up.
のまあいわばアンスキルワーカ
So unskilled workers
ー、
can grow into semi-skilled workers, and then further up to skilled workers. And then there's a pathway in which they may be able to live in Japan permanently. So within this new system, so there are several parts
人間の安全保障
and how they, I don't know if this relatively exactly relate to human security, but I will try. So the new system, so the original system, the training program, so with the originating country, so there was a cooperation with the originating country.
庁のホームページ
And you can see on the website of the Immigration Services Agency, so we have agreements with 13 countries. And that means that so people movement, human mobility, transnational human mobility corridors.
切ってはいけない
So we cannot disrupt this corridor to borders.
もう送り出し国
So that sending countries and receiving countries are different countries. However, receiving countries,
にやってきたものではな
it's not that people come unsolicited, but
という
so there was a continuous link from the originating countries to receiving countries. And also this was already available in the training program, but the people who provide support to these workers,
本人がまだ出身国
so
の時から
from the time this person is still in his or her original country,
ですよという状況
so they get the information. So this is where you're going to work. So this is mandated.
道の
So in the corridor where people move, so in the expedited phases, contact should and engagement
だか
is required.
らではなかったというのがいろいろな不幸の
So oftentimes many misfortunes occur because some people think this is not what I expected. But if someone doesn't like the situation based on the information that they receive, then they can decide not to come. And also we've been hearing a lot about skills.
をされ
So after coming to Japan, the career development system,
たポイントでございます。つまり、この
so in other words, this corridor
国を超えたところでまたこれもブチッと出る
is once again transnational corridor. So at borders, they shouldn't be disrupted. But in Japan, the corridor continues because security is for physical security, human lives, and human dignity. Those need to be protected, and people should be able to pursue happiness. And by developing their careers, their lives can advance. So the system encompasses that. So what's happening? So this is happening in Japan, but the migrant worker's life. So starting from his country of origin and crossing borders and coming to Japan, and his or her life can advance. So the system is designed in such a way that that's made it possible. And lastly, one point. So this corridor where people move. So as many people as possible should be involved. It is designed in such a way because many people's eyes on this particular migrant worker. And of course, there shouldn't be any brokers. But as many people as possible should be involved in this corridor. So the system is designed in such a way. So reiterating myself, I don't know whether or not this can be called a human security, but I think this system can contribute to the idea or the concept. So I wanted to introduce that.
Thank you, Ms. Sasaki, for the very interesting points. And so I want you to ask to Dr. Orita about her points that she said that we need to continue the journey, not only thinking about the destination, only about the leaving, arriving. So from the perspective of our JICA, how we can do, how can we should play a role Japan. So if you have some thoughts, please let us know.
Hi, thank you very much, Dr. Saito. And then let me start by expressing our appreciation for the great discussion with a very rare combination of the participants. And then it was highly meaningful to discuss human mobility and the different status, different schemes together, covering both migrants and refugees with academia and practitioners. And of course, Japan got three aspects, as a donor country, a host country for immigrants, and as a member of the international international community. Actually, today we are supposed to talk about Professor Haas's theory and the concept of human security, provided a strong foundation for us to come together and engage in this meaningful discussion. Then I would like to comment on a few points. And then first, I would like to comment from the perspective of general development aid actor. To be honest, it can be said that migration hasn't been a major issue for the development aid actors until the last 10 years. And then development aid actors usually consider assistance based on OECD-DAC rules, which implies cooperation from developed countries to developing countries. However, in recent years, the boundary between developed and developing countries has become blurred when it comes to migrant. My point is that migration is quite unique in that developed countries are also directly involved as parties on the issues. The complexity and importance of migration in development have been increasingly recognized as reflected in its inclusion in the SDGs and the World Development Report 2023. And then secondly, I just like to point that Japan as a donor country and Japan as a host country nowadays. And then also from that point, I would like, I would like to comment that from viewpoint of JICA. Actually, JICA now is trying to play three roles to contribute to this, people's movement issue. And the one is to support for migrant workers in Japan. And the other is that assistance for forced displaced people and refugees in developing countries. And then third is providing overall economic and social development in developing countries contribution for reducing root causes and the capacity building. So actually, let me introduce you that one unique effort of JICA nowadays. Supporting for migrant workers in Japan for JICA is kind of new. And then in 2021, JICA has established the Office for Foreign Human Resource, the Office for Human Resources within its Domestic Strategy and Partnership Department to support migrant workers in Japan. And its initiatives are based on three main pillars, like capacity building to enhance migration's contribution to economic development, and then promotion of respect for the human rights of migrant workers, and creation of inclusive society. So for those two rules, I will be I will be mentioning about the other two functions. So thirdly, I just like to talk a bit about recognizing the importance of the support through HDP Nexus. HDP Nexus means collaboration between peace, humanitarian, and development actors. And then viewing through the lens of human security means to focus on people. However, the more we focus on the migrants, the more we realize that the importance of human security, not only for migrants, but also for country of origin and receiving countries. It is particularly necessary to reduce the burden to host communities or even to enhance the benefits for the host communities. For example, in supporting refugees and the internal displaced persons, strengthening the absorbing capacity of host community is essential. Our Office of Peace Building has been engaged in promoting the self-reliance of refugees and supporting the formulation of long-term development plan for communities through the HDP Nexus approach. It would be important that migrants become opportunities for the host community to increase the acceptance incentive. This is, of course, the point made by Professor De Haas, and today, Dr. Saito and Professor Gracia emphasized that it is important to provide not only skill but also empowerment to migrants. Increasing the capacity of migrants is not only the benefit to the migrants themselves, but also benefit to the receiving country. So addressing root causes is and also addressing root causes in the countries of origin naturally requires human resource development, institution building, and comprehensive support for economic and social development. Effectively, addressing migration requests requires the engagement of diverse stakeholders, including humanitarian actors, development cooperation actors, and others. Such collective effort might embody the solidarity expressed in the concept of human security. So lastly, let me a little bit introduce about the Ogata Research Institute. Ogata Research Institute has recently focused on human mobility. We collaborate with IOM on forced migration research project. Last October, as an outcome, the book Forced Migration and Humanitarian Action has been published, and the guidance note for practitioners are being released in 5 languages. So besides the research in Indonesia presented by Dr. Saito, we have initiated a research on human security in Africa. Development cooperation and humanitarian assistance are fields of science. We would like to explore bridging the gap between the field and the academic. So that's my quick comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Orita. Yeah, we want to discuss more, but we don't have time, so we want to keep going for the question from the floor. We got really good question in Japanese, so I want to read it in Japanese. プレゼンテーションを聞くと本当に
Listening to your presentations,
として話されて、
you are targeting very diverse people,
また別の論
and some topic is focused on refugees, and some topic is very focused on migrants.
に言及がありました。
And so there was a mention of refugees and migrants, but sometimes it felt to me they're a mixed, more context-based approach and research
ために求めら
is called for.
It's really a good point to think about mixed migration, the main theme for today. So I want to ask to UNGR, Valerie, about the point, what your thought. Please, Valerie.
Thank you so much. And I'm aware of the limited time to respond, but just to say that, really the Japan's role in the region and the commitment to human security and humanitarian development and peace nexus is crucial, and Japan is also was a co-convener of the second global refugee forum that was mentioned at the beginning. So there are many areas where Japan can play a meaningful role in the operationalization of the roots-based approach, and I would categorize it in various areas, including, for example, how to strengthen the protection system in responses, including on anti-trafficking along the key routes in the region, Asia-Pacific panoramic route. Then I would say a second area which would be critical is supporting regular and safe pathways that we discussed quite a lot today. And Japan has very, very good examples to build on, including the Japanese initiative for the future of Syrian refugees, which is implemented by JICA, and where Syrian refugees have access to education-based complementary pathway, and that have been expanded over the years. So this is another example, but of course also resettlement. I believe Japan has been involved in the resettlement for the past 15 years. Alternatives to dangerous journeys such as labor mobility that we mentioned today, family reunification, complementary pathway. So I would say Japan is really a key player because it's one of the few countries actually in Asia that are parties to the 1951 Refugee Convention. And Japan could also play as a role model in terms of support to asylum capacity building efforts with governments in the region, technical support, eventually also financial support as needed. So there are several entry points that are critical and that could be considered. And as various of the speakers mentioned, really refugees bring quite an important diversity to the societies and communities where they live. This can enhance work with the private sector because of the different language skills, of the different approaches and knowledge they bring. So I would say this is key. Let me stop here given the time. Over.
Thank you, Valerie. Yeah, it's time constraints. So I want to ask quick to Sasaki, Ms. Sasaki, if you have some comments about regarding Valerie's comments.
Thank you very much. The original question was about the foreign labor issue.
本当はもっと
and
この外国人の方の特性とか
the characteristics of the individual foreign workers need to be considered. I think that is where the question comes from. But we had extremely a lot of factors that were incorporated into today's theme. That's another point I think that was mentioned in the question. And I do agree with the person who asked the question that we should have more detailed and mindful discussions for each of the different types of people who move. And so who are migrants? Sometimes it is immigrants. We use in Japan for people who want to be a long-term resident in Japan. Some people only use it for people who are here temporarily for work. And in Japan, that discussion has not materialized. That is one aspect, I believe. But this theme,
外国人の方の
under this theme, the
守るとか、そういうこと
protecting human rights of the foreign workers, human security. So attention around that is gaining momentum, and that is and these themes around this issue should be the basic assumption that we should work on, base our other further discussions on.
Thank you for the very supportive comments for us. So yeah, I understand that it's really these difficult topics about mixed migration is really very new topics, I think. So the classification is certainly important, but I want to say that first of all, we need to speak with one voice. What is safe and secure corridor for all? So we want to make a starting point for today's discussion. And so this is, I think, a great opportunity for us and for the audience for today's session. Thank you so much. So, and this is already 2 minutes left. So it's really we're going to the end, but I want to introduce the Dr. Ha's comments. I asked him regarding about what is safe and secure corridor, and what's your vision for what a truly people-centered movement system should look like in the near future? What core principle or priorities should guide us as we work to build a safer, more humane, and more empowering mobility infrastructure for migrants and refugees and their stakeholders? It's really a difficult question, but he answered that this is an excellent question to which there are no easy answers. But I think what is key, also from the perspective of the aspiration capabilities model, to stop analyzing migration as a kind of zero-sum game between the rights we give to migrants and the extent to which destination and origin countries can benefit from migration. A key aspect here is migrant rights. Although from a short-term perspective, it may seem attractive for politicians to give migrants limited rights or tolerate the exploitation of migrant workers, as this allows them to maintain the illusion that migration is temporary, or by even avoiding the M word, as in Japan. However, in the longer term, the denial of the de facto permanency of migration as a feature of the wealthy society is creating problems of integration and segregation in the longer term, as it sends the message to migrants they will never belong, while legal and practical exclusion mechanisms hinder their full participation and belonging to destination society. As much as cleaning and onto guesswork illusion has created long-term problems in both Europe and the US, the current emphasis that migrants are not really migrants, but for instance, trainee, as seems to be the case in Japan. It is only by embracing migration as an intrinsic, inevitable, and structural feature of wealthy society that we can make sure migrants are given the tool to integrate, the discrimination and exclusion can be prevented, and the electoral backlash this may create. Clinging under illusion of temporariness is also harmful for the integration of refugees. Instead, states should focus on facilitating the legal admission of migrant workers and setting up refugee admission system that encourage their integration by offering pathways to permanent residence and citizenship. This will also be positive for improving the development potential of migration for origin countries, as successful migrants will also have increased capabilities, such as money, knowledge, and social networks that enable them to invest socially, politically, and economically in origin countries. This shows that well-designed immigration policy can both be to the benefits of origin and destination societies, as well as to migrants. At the same time, we should be under no illusion that immigration fix structures socio-economic problems, such as aging in destination countries and structural development problems in origin countries. However, migration can certainly play a positive part if policies are designed that give a real opportunity to migrant workers and refugees to participate in destination society instead of marginalizing them, which is the usual result of policies of exclusion and denial of reality towards migrants. Already past the time, but that's interesting. Second question. My question is, as the potential for increased migration from Africa to Japan emerges alongside existing flaws from Asia, what are your thoughts on how Japan should navigate the shifting dynamic? And he answered as I highlighted in his book, how migration really works. Sub-Saharan Africa is the only major world region, with the exception perhaps of parts of South Asia, that has a large immigration potential for the future, as any form of development in this region is likely to increase people's capabilities and aspiration to migrate. As the migration potential of several Asian countries might well decrease, it is likely that African migrants will constitute a growing share of transcontinental migrants. And we can clearly see this in recent trends of migration from West Africa to Europe, from East Africa and the Horn to the Gulf region, and limited migration to China and India, and perhaps even to South America. So a forward-looking immigration policy certainly has to consider Africa as a potential source region for migrants, also to Japan, to fill particular skills shortage. However, to avoid problems of marginalization as described in the answer of my first question, it is important not to consider migration as a quick fix to labor shortage, but to think about longer-term issues of the social needs of migrants. So, to the extent that migrants are admitted, it seems wise to focus on the creation of legal pathways that will facilitate the integration of migrants, the political support of which can only be created if there is an official recognition that Japan has already become de facto immigration country. If such recognition will not be achieved, immigration is likely to generate long-term problems of integration and segregation. It's really, I agreed with his comments, and it's really important, points that he raised. So I want to complete this session from the Mr. Haskell.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saito, for your moderation, and also thank you for all of the panelists, Ms. Valerie, Ms. Laura, Dr. Fala, Ms. Sasaki, and Dr. Orita. And again, Dr. Saito for the moderation. So, for joining today and sharing your insightful views with us. So please give them a round of applause again. And all the audience's participants, thank you very much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this seminar. We sincerely hope that you will remain interested in and keep your eyes on the issues of this migration, very important topic. So all contents scheduled today have been finished. So we are sharing the feedback form on the screen. So we appreciate your feedback truly. Thank you once again, and please have a wonderful evening and a good weekend. Thank you very much.